All right, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to another installment of the Green Team's programs. This one is appropriately named Earth Day, Nonpoints Pollution and Watershed. Our presenter today is Brian Pink. We're ready, Brian. Thank you, and take it away.
Awesome. Happy to be here. Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Pink, and I am an AmeriCorps New Jersey Watershed Ambassador. I do just want to quickly state that I am presenting on behalf of the Parsippany Green Team, so I'm thankful for them to help bring me here today. The Green Team is kind of doing this as part of an initiative towards their goals with Sustainable Jersey. They are trying to be one of the few towns in New Jersey to reach the gold level of sustainability. They currently are bronze. So yeah, with that, I'll kind of get started. I am an AmeriCorps New Jersey Watershed Ambassador. A lot to unpack there, but no worries, I will kind of flesh that out for us right here, right now. So AmeriCorps is a federally funded service program for young adults like myself to basically spread out across the entirety of the United States and do service in various communities targeting areas of need. So right now, a lot of that is helping with vaccinations, getting shots in the arm, and logistics. In other times, that might be more natural disaster relief or community rebuilding in underprivileged areas, providing education, or passing out food at the soup kitchen and stuff like that. My specific program is the New Jersey Watershed Ambassador Program. It is specific to New Jersey. And basically, I provide environmental education and environmental community service, helping protect our waterways and clean up our environment, which is really awesome to be able to be here to talk about on Earth Day, which I would like to think of it as really part of Earth Month or even Earth Year. We really should be thinking about this every day, all the time, not just on April 22nd. And so the last kind of word in that statement is watershed. Watershed. What is a watershed? What I like to do is start out by talking about what we know about water. And if I was more readily able to converse with you, I would engage in a conversation. I think for what we're going to do tonight, I'll just ask a lot of hypotheticals and kind of move along. So if I ask you, say, to think about anything you know about water, I imagine that you might start off by thinking about the rivers and the lakes and streams flowing through New Jersey, and then maybe even move on to the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, the beach. You love to go there, swim, hang by the beach and enjoy the breeze. And then maybe you would start to think about the water in your water bottle, the stuff that you drink, the water in your sink used to wash your dishes, even the water in your shower, rinsing off your body every day or few days. And then maybe even the water in your toilet that you. And so then we start to think about the water in our water bottles that we drink, and then maybe even the water in our clothing that help produce our clothing, help produce, our pencils, our computer. There's really water that is impacted in parts of our lives in every scenario and which way. Then you might start to think about water in terms of the water cycle, right? We know that the water might maybe start out in the large ocean, then the sun hits it, it evaporates up into the sky, condensate into clouds, and then precipitate onto the land around us. And when it falls as rain or snow, it then kind of, falls on a house, runs off onto a driveway. You see it on the roads, around the shopping mall, your school, and your park and your river as well. and it flows somewhere. It goes away, right? It goes away, it flows somewhere. And basically, the way it flows is downhill via gravity. So just another quick thought experiment, if you will. Let's take a gander back in time to February, January. It snowed. Our entire town is covered with snow, and the child in us wants to go sledding. We start at the bottom of the hill, we pick up our sled, and we huff and we puff, we climb up to the top of our sled hill, get on our sled, and ride down to the bottom of that mountain. We hit all the bumps, maybe we tumble a bit, but eventually land up at the bottom, stopped. Think carefully about what I just said, right? We walked to the top, we got on our sled, and we rode downhill from the high point of elevation downhill to the low point of elevation, and we did not ride up the mountain to the other side. Water does the same thing, right? It will land on an area of higher elevation, flow downward, and eventually the water is all going to flow to a common body of water, such as a river or a lake, and then eventually out into the ocean. And that's basically what the definition of a watershed is. And I'll use the model in front of me now to kind of accentuate that point. What I have in front of me is an Enviroscape model. It is a scale model of a watershed. And based on the definition I just told you, it is an area of land bounded by regional topography, elevation, or higher, where water will flow downward via gravity to a common body of water, such as rivers and the lake or ocean at the bottom. Now, if anywhere water falls on this bottle, it will flow downhill into the river and to that lake. Doesn't matter if it's up in the top corner, all the way down here, or over here in the parking lot. However, if water were to fall over here, outside of this model, or over here, or in front, or even back here where I am, water would not flow to that lake. It would flow somewhere else. And that's okay. It's just part of a different watershed. Anywhere the water falls, it'll flow downhill to a common body of water. And maybe that other watershed would eventually meet up with this one to form an even larger watershed. And we can see that idea in our model, right? We have many small tributaries. These are all smaller watersheds. And then they meet up at the one large lake, forming the large scale watershed. And what we see here is that our water is generally clean. We have a clean lake. We have clean groundwater below the lake. But this watershed does not necessarily look like the watershed that we live in, right? I mean, I see some roads, but I don't know about you guys, but the township I live in is not just roads and open land. We have a lot of other things like buildings, cars, farms, and whatnot. So what I'd like to take a moment and do is actually build our watershed. I've got some props. We're going to go through the different parts of our watershed and build it so that it looks like something we actually live in. We'll start up here in the top, that right corner for all of you. We've got our parking lot with our factory. Then we'll go down here. This is our farmland. We've got our tractor, kind of tilling and plowing the field. We've got the farmhouse. Every farmer needs a place to live. We've got the barn house with all the hay and the horses and whatever may live there. And then we have a lot of livestock. We have sheep. We have cows sleeping by the river. We have another sheep, another cow, and then we even have our rooster waking us up in the morning and telling us what time of day it is. Then, as we move over to the road, we have our bridges helping us transport ourselves over those tributaries that are moving through the landscape. We have bridges, and where we have transportation and bridges, we do also have cars. Cars, and where we have cars, we need people, right? People live here, and so we have our residential area, or in what I like to call it, the mansion area. These are extremely large houses. You could fit like 10 families in all of them, but this is our residential area, so we will build it as is. Where there's people, we want to make space for more people. So we have our construction area with our construction digger. And of course, we all go to the bathroom. So we have our sewage treatment plant or wastewater treatment plant as well. I will point out we do have a golf course right here. We all like to get outside and have some fun. We have a park and golf course. And then we have our pet. This is actually a goat. We're going to pretend it's our lovely dogs and cats. I know we all have pets that we love so very much. And then down by the lake, we do have some wildlife, such as that bird. And then lastly, I'll point out that we do have a mountain up here. It's been a bit deforested, so it's not as green as it may have once been. With that, we have a watershed that looks quite a bit more like where we live. Unfortunately, where we live and where there are people, there's also pollution. Pollution. Maybe we don't know what all know what pollution is. So let's just take a moment to define what pollution is. In general, pollution is a harmful or toxic substance that is man-made, or at the very least, usually man-caused, that when it interacts with the environment or water, it is harmful to the plants and animals and water quality in that environment, right? So today we specifically want to talk about water pollution, harmful toxic substances that get into our water and can be harmful to the plants and animals and harmful to the water quality, which, as we know, we use all the time. There's a lot of other types of pollution. We have air pollution, we have noise pollution, but we are focusing on water pollution today. So without further ado, I'd like to actually start talking about various sources of water pollution and why those sources of pollution are harmful. We'll start over here in the farm. We have our bare soil where we grow our crops. We have our large crop that we want to grow to provide food, as well as cotton, whatever this farm may be growing. And then we have our livestock. We use them to provide other sources of food, provide wool, but we do have our livestock on the farm. Now, when we grow our food, we want our food to grow really fast, and we want it to grow really large. Therefore, we use something called fertilizer, right? Fertilizer is a basically ground up nutrient of phosphorus and nitrogen, and they provide the food for our crop to grow. Now, that's all great, but when that nutrient actually land up in our water, they provide more food, more energy than is naturally found in the aquatic environment. And so you end up with algae eating up those nutrients, fertilizer, the phosphorus, nitrogen, and proliferating, growing way more than might usually. They'll end up covering the entire surface of the water in a process called eutrophication, and it ends up preventing the sun from penetrating that water column. That means all the plants and animals that live in that water mostly plants, can no longer do photosynthesis. They no longer have the sunlight, they can't do photosynthesis. Plants cannot grow. That means there's no food for the animals that live there. Also, what happens is the algae actually also eats oxygen. and we end up with so much algae using up so much oxygen. There's no more oxygen in the water, and all the plants and animals and aquatic organisms that might otherwise be living there do suffocate and die. So the fertilizer does become a source of pollution, and we will display that using our water dye, or food coloring dye. Now, also, when we're growing our crop, use pesticides, right? We don't want any pests. We use herbicides. We don't want any weeds to grow and outcompete our crop. We don't want pests to eat the crop. So we use herbicides and pesticides. These are toxic chemicals. Their sole purpose is to kill off other organisms. Now, they're not just toxic to those organisms, they're also toxic to us and other aquatic plants and wildlife. So when those herbicides and pesticides wash into our waterways, they are harmful to those that live there as well. And so we add a little bit more to our cropland. Also on the farm, we have our livestock, and where there's life, just like humans, one must go to the bathroom. Now, as you can see, all of these livestock are quite close to our river, and so when they go to the bathroom, they're actually going to the bathroom right up against the water. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I was potty trained and taught to go to the bathroom, I was taught to also wash my hands. We don't want that bacteria on our hands. It's very harmful. It can make us very sick. And neither do the plants and animals in the water. Not to mention, we drink that water. We do not want the harmful bacteria from our livestock in our water. Nonetheless, we do go to the bathroom, and so we have some waste bacteria pollution. Got some over there as well. Now, the next source of pollution I do want to talk about is what I think is one of the more unusual or harder to get sources of pollution. And I'm talking about the dirt, the soil. Soil can be a source of water pollution. And I know that can be a kind of unique, confusing concept because soil is generally natural. But this soil is completely bare. It's not covered by vegetation, by grass. And so by nature, this soil is loose, it's unconsolidated. It's free for wind and water to wash it away. And you can actually see that some of this soil is already starting to wash into our lake. That means there's more soil than would normally be in our water. So to understand why this might be pollution, little thought exercise. Who here likes to go swimming? I know I do. I go swimming in my pool, the town pool. I go swimming in, the clean lake and the ocean. Crystal blue as far as the eye can see. I can see my body, I can see other people. Sometimes I can even see little fish swimming around. But now, imagine you're swimming in mud, a dirty, icky, grimy mud substance, where when you get out, you're just covered in dirt and grime. I'd imagine at this point, most of you would put your hands down. You don't want to swim in that kind of water. And neither do our plant and aquatic organisms. They want to be able to swim freely as well. To put it a little bit more scientific, dirt pollution is water pollution because when that soil enters our waterway, it actually absorbs the sun's heat and raises the temperature of that water column. Raises the temperature to temperature degrees that would not otherwise be hospitable to the plant and aquatic organisms that live in that water. It also creates a lot of turbidity, i.e. you can see a lot of dirt. All of that dirt blocks the sun from penetrating into the water column and prevents photosynthesis from occurring. Very, very harmful to any plants that live in that water. And so, dirt does become a source of water pollution. Now, as you move away from the farm, we have our roads. And on our roads, we have our cars. Where we have cars, we want safe transportation. So we take a little gander back in time once more to February to January. And there's tons of snow and cold temperatures. The roads start to freeze over. So what do? We put salt on the road, road salt. Road salt helps to melt that ice and lower that melting temperature, allowing us to drive safely across the town. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I think of rivers and lakes, I think of freshwater streams and freshwater aquatic organisms. As soon as that salt washes into our freshwater streams and lakes, we no longer have fresh water. We have salt water. And freshwater aquatic plants and organisms want fresh water, not salt water. Otherwise, they would live in the ocean. So that salt does, in fact, become a source of water pollution. So you can see in orange, kind of wrapping all around. Now, we also drive our cars. Cars are notable as a source of pollution. I'd imagine most of us would think of carbon dioxide. And you're right, carbon dioxide is a big pollutant. It's specifically a greenhouse gas, and it contributes to climate change. However, we are not talking about air pollution right now. We're talking about water pollution. So we're not going to get into that. But carbon dioxide, when it goes up into the atmosphere, does interact with water. And when that water falls, it falls as acid rain. That acid rain gets into our waterways and changes the pH, the chemical makeup of our waterways, right? And that chemical makeup upsets the balance of those who live there, and thus it does become a water pollutant source. We also have our cars themselves. They drip some oil as we drive around. And so that toxic chemical, that sludge of the oil that they leak, is a water pollutant as well, very harmful to any organism that have to ingest it. Not good for us to drink either. And then there's also, other chemicals on the car, antifreeze for one, and grease that help keep the car running. Finally, when we ride around in our car, some of us like to, pick up McDonald's, drink our plastic water bottles, and then throw the trash out our window. That trash, that plastic, is a physical pollutant to our waterways. It starts to break down into smaller and smaller bits. The different animals eat it. It can make them choke. It can get in their digestive system, mess up the reproductive system, and poison them as well. So that trash, that physical pollutant, is a water pollutant too. And I want to point out that the roads themselves contribute to this pollution, right? Because the roads are an impermeable surface. Nothing can infiltrate into the ground, and so everything must run off to somewhere else. We see that our roads have encroached on the buffer area between us and the stream, meaning there's even less permeable surfaces to absorb that water. And so everything we put on these roads can be carried into our waterways super easily. Now, I want to move up into our residential area. And a lot of this is going to be repetition of some things you've seen before, but we see them cropping up in different ways, right? So it's springtime. A lot of us like to do some spring cleaning, wash down our windows, clean up the house, maybe even wash our car with soap, with bleach, and other cleaning chemicals. Again, these are chemicals, toxic substances meant to break up organic matter that might otherwise be there. Also, very toxic to our plant and aquatic organisms that live in the stream. Next, we have our very, very green lawns with our invasive species that we think are very pretty. In order to keep them growing, we use a lot of fertilizer, right? We want our lawn to be extremely green, grow really fast and healthy. And we use herbicides and pesticides to rid ourselves of any pests and weeds we don't want. We know fertilizer creates eutrophication, the excess growth of algae. We know pesticides and herbicides are a toxic chemical as well. And we use those same things on our golf course. So the golf course and our beautiful green lawns in the neighborhood are big sources of water pollution. And I'll also note that when we grow our grass, we use a ton of water, right? We have invasive species that are not adapted to this climate regime. And so they use even more water than they might ordinarily use. And that means there's less water for streams and lakes, an indirect source of water pollution. In our residential area, we also want to create new shopping malls, new houses, and so we start to tear up the vegetation, expose more dirt, and as we know from the farm, that dirt is a source of pollution as well, because it blocks out the sunlight and reduces the temperature. Finally, and this is a bit of a doozy, metaphorically speaking, we all have pets that we love so much. We take them for walks, we let them go outside, and pets, like humans, have to go to the bathroom, just like the livestock on our farm. Now, hopefully, you all pick up after your pet, but not everyone does. And so their harmful bacteria waste, when they go to the bathroom, their poop does end up in our environment, and it is a source of water pollution. Now, in addition to that, you and I also go to the bathroom. I've said that several times already. We go to the toilet, we flush it, and our waste goes away. Now, where is away? Well, away is the water treatment plant, sewage treatment plant. And usually, most of the time, they do treat our waste, clean it all up, and then put that water clean back into the rivers and waterways. However, sometimes when there's a really, really big rainstorm, that treatment plant does overflow, meaning our harmful bacteria does in fact end up in the waterways as well. The very final thing I want to mention is our mountain. As I mentioned earlier, it has been deforested. We use that wood, those trees, those wood for lumber, to build our houses, for our pencils, we use it for paper, and everything in between. And what we're left with is bare soil. As we know from the farm and our construction area, that bare soil is definitely a source of water pollution. And so what we're left with is our watershed, now covered by lots of pollution, all of it basically sourced from human or human-caused activities. But you might be looking at it and say, well, none of that pollution is in our waterways. And well, you are right. I will kind of address that point in one moment. I do want to point out one last source of pollution. In our houses, we live here, we order stuff from Amazon, from Walmart, we go to the grocery store, all comes in plastic bags, trash bags, packaging, what have you. Then we take that trash, put it in our trash bin, and put it outside. Now, every so often, we maybe don't lock that trash bin all the way. We put it in the trash bag and just leave it there for a long while. And that trash, that plastic, that physical pollution does make it into our environment. And so that is one final source of water pollution. Right. So coming back further, we have all of this pollution. It's just kind of sitting there. It's not actually in our water. So what's the problem? Well, I'll show you in just one moment. For cleaning purposes, I am going to remove all of my props from the model. We all have incredible imagination, so I'm relying on imagination to just pretend that all of these props are still here. We still have a residential area with all the houses. We still have the sewage treatment plant, the cars, the bridges, and we still have our farm as well, with all the livestock, the cows, the sheep, the barn, the farmer, and the tractor. And so once in a while, we get something called a rainstorm, where water actually starts to come across the landscape. And when that does, and when that happens, you see it hitting the soil in our construction area, capturing that plastic, that trash, the fertilizers, the pesticides, the bacteria from our harmful waste, the soil from the mountaintops that have been deforested, the road salt, the oil pollution, and everything on the road. And in most rainstorms, what you'll see is that we start to just get some cooling, right? You see things starting to spread across the landscape, but it's not really all flowing all the way downhill. We have something. And again, you're right. But then we might get something with what I call a hurricane, right? And so taking our rain cloud, getting rid of our small sun shower rainstorm, and initiating the hurricane. And what we see is that water is going to land across our landscape at high elevational areas and flow downhill into our rivers, and then eventually pool into our common body of water, the lake at the bottom. And as it does, it carries, again, different versions of pollution, the livestock, the fertilizers, the pesticides, the soil, and everything else that we saw on this model. And so what we're left with is a lake that was waterways, rivers that look dark and grimy, no longer the clean blue water that we had seen once before. If you were asked to swim in there, would you want to swim in there? I don't think so. Would you want to drink that water? Again, I'd imagine that you're all probably shaking your head right now. Plants and aquatic organisms and animals are the same way. They do not want to drink that water. They do not want to live in that water, and yet they do. And remember, we use this water to drink as well. We recreate on this water. So having this dirtified, polluted water is really bad for the entire ecosystem and ourselves as well. Now, I do want to just point out one other thing. So if you look at this model, and I asked you this question, where did the soil pollution come from? I'd imagine that some of you might point at the farm over here, some of you might point at the construction area, and then even some others of you will point at our deforested mountain. If I asked you, where did the fertilizer and pesticide pollution come from? Some of you again might point to the farm, some others might point to the grass residential area, and then maybe someone else would point to the golf course. You could ask about plastic pollution, you point to the residential area, the road. You could ask about livestock, bacteria, the residential area, the treatment plant, the farm. Point is, we all point to somewhere else. And no one would be able to tell me exactly where that pollution came from. That's something called non-point source pollution. You cannot point to one location where all of that pollution came from. Non-point source. In contrast, we have my friend the factory up in the top corner over here. Don't worry, I did not forget about him. But every once in a while, the factory does emit a toxic waste or sludge. And when it does that, you will see that sludge come out of its pipe into the drainage ditch and flow down the river into the rest of the watershed. And if I asked you where did that toxic sludge come from, every single one of you would point directly to that factory. That is called point source pollution, right? So you have all these sources of a non-point source water pollution, and then we can point to this one, that is our point source pollution to our watershed. Now, just a few more things to go over. So far, we've discussed the surface of our watershed, of our environment, but the watershed also includes our groundwater. Water does not just exist on the surface. We often get our drinking water from the groundwater as well. And so what actually happens is all of this water in the lake, all of that pollution will infiltrate into the ground. And when that happens, our clean water that we saw in our groundwater earlier today will actually go from being clean to just as polluted as the surface, which is not very helpful if you want drinking water. It's not very helpful for all the trees and the vegetation that go into the ground to get that clean water. And so it does really have a full-scale impact. Now, I've been very gloom and doom throughout the presentation, but in the spirit of Earth Day, we want to talk about ways that we can actually protect our beautiful planet, protect our waterways. And so what can we do to minimize our water pollution? Cool, 740 was right on schedule. So we look at our farm, we'll start there. We have our fertilizers and pesticides that we use to grow our crops. Well, to start, maybe we could use a different farming technique where we're actually able to grow our crops without the use of excess additive nutrients. Maybe we can, and that other technique would also possibly mean we don't need pesticides and herbicides, because perhaps those other organisms would grow in tandem, they would coexist with what we have there. We could also consider using a maybe more natural or organic product instead of the chemical herbicides and pesticides. They would still be harmful to the environment, but maybe a bit less so. We also could think about when we apply those herbicides and pesticides, and this goes to our grass as well in a residential area. Think about when you apply it. Don't put it on the ground right before a large rainstorm. That's not going to do your crop, your grass, your native vegetation any good either. It's just going to get washed away. Try to put it on a few days beforehand. Let it actually get absorbed into the very substances you want it to be. We can think about our animals, our livestock. They all have to go to the bathroom. I'm not saying don't let them go to the bathroom. That's not possible. But we saw all of them go in the bathroom right along our river. Perhaps we could use our handy dandy fence, put a fence up, a barrier right between them and the stream, and provide some distance between where they do their business and the water. This would actually allow there to be some distance, some time for the harmful bacteria to break down and not impact our waterways to the same extent. Lastly, we have the soil from our loose field. And the main idea here is that we can use something called a wetland or marsh, right? So I've got a little green strip right there that is vegetation that loves water. It really thrives there, and it actually soaks up the pollutants and soaks up the soil and provides a buffer zone between that and the lake and streams as well. It's a great way to add natural habitat for our birds and wildlife, while also providing a natural defense between what we do and what we want to protect. Then we move on to the road. We think about our road salt. Well, perhaps we can maybe not use as much road salt, maybe not use it at all. Do we really need to all be driving around during a snowstorm or right after a snowstorm? I don't know. That I'll leave that to you to decide. There are also other techniques, such as using soil and dirt, but obviously that has other issues as well. A lot of give and take. We can think about our cars. Perhaps we can make sure we get our cars checked up and taken care of, that make sure they're in working condition, so they're not leaking oil, the antifreeze isn't spreading around the landscape. We can maybe not use the car, ride your bike if the place is relatively close, minimize that chance for pollution. Carpool, use buses, public transportation, and the like. And then, of course, if you're eating food, if you have something in your car, pack it out with you. Don't throw it outside your window. Make sure you put that in a trash can. As you move up to the residential area, again, we have fertilizers and pesticides. We discussed maybe using less of them, think about when you use them, using less toxic substances. But we can also maybe use some native vegetation. A lot of us use invasive species that are not well adapted to the area, and that they use more water, or we need herbicides and pesticides to keep them out. If we use native vegetation, they are adapted to the climate, they will grow really well, and you'll use less water, less fertilizer, and less herbicide. We think about the spring cleaning. Again, we can use maybe some less harmful, more organic substances. Use that to wash your car, your windows, what have you. Our trash. Make sure you put your trash out right before the truck comes. Maybe the night before. Don't leave it out there for a long period of time. And make sure you really lock those trash cans. We don't want the trash escaping or any animals coming in and tearing it apart. We can always make sure to pick up the poop or waste after our pets, put it in a little baggie, throw it in the trash. And then a bit of the construction. For that, we can try using a fence. A fence is a great way to kind of hold some of that sediment in. And then we can try to make sure the construction workers are using a tarp to cover that soil, that sediment, and make sure it doesn't get wet and wash away. The sewage treatment plant, unfortunately, there's not too much we can do in the way of that. It's just kind of built-in infrastructure. We have the forested area, right? The deforested area. Well, perhaps we can plant some trees. Go out into your community, work with your township, and plant some trees. Those trees will provide extra habitat to the environment, to the plants and animals, and will also, their roots will hold that soil and stop it from washing away. We can also plant trees and vegetation along the corridors, the riparian buffers along those streams, help shore up some of this excess soil, and that will also provide a vegetation buffer between what we do and where that pollution goes. The trees and vegetation can actually soak up that pollution and stop it from getting into our waterways. And then, of course, we can do cleanup, right? Just because you see trash along our roads and in the river does not mean we need to leave it there. We can work with our friends, our family, our community, and pick up that trash. Stop it from washing into the rivers, the lake, and the ocean. And just an aside, kind of a tangential fact, we do expect, scientists do expect that there will be more trash and plastic in the ocean by 2050 than fish. By 2050, more trash and plastic than fish. It's really kind of mind-boggling. So any little thing we can do to help is important. We have our factory over here. You can't really, walk up to it and stop them from doing anything. but there are laws and regulations in place to stop them from emitting harmful toxic waste. Usually they are permitted, they're doing things correctly, but if you do see something that's inappropriate, you can always go to your local township or state representative, write them a letter, and share with them what's going on. And then finally, the last thing we can do, especially in the spirit of Earth Day, is think about what we learned here today. Share it with all your friends and family, and maybe even teach some people something new. I am a New Jersey Watershed ambassador, and I hope that you guys learned something awesome today and can be ambassadors to your community as well. With that, I say thank you,